So many people are freaking out about this headline about $5,000 RTX 5090s incoming, huge GPU price hikes in Q1 of 2026. And I want to kind of like calm everybody down. Let's read what the actual source for this information is, what they're saying, and try to take this with the level head, because I'm seeing this headline all over the place and people freaking out. Now, all of the sites running with this in English are seeming to source it from this site, newsis.com. This is a Korean language outlet. And they're saying Nvidia and AMD to significantly increase GPU prices starting next month. And they are citing some industry sources giving them a statement on the 30th. So I think we should read what they're specifically saying here and then talk about it. Because I do think, and we've seen lots of other sources saying that GPU prices are going up, but I think the $5,000 panic attack, well, I have a lot more to say about that. But first, check out Jawa.gg. Now, this is an amazing marketplace for PC components, full pre-built systems. You can get great deals here. Again, being in the used market, you can often save a ton of money compared to the new prices, especially with new prices going up insane amounts right now with all of this RAM situation. Now, at Jawa, you can find entire pre-built systems. They have a great PC finder where you can search for like performance in a specific game at a specific resolution. You can search for specific components, but you can even shop PC by theme, make sure that it fits your living environment. Oftentimes, this is a big part of your living space and like kind of showing who you are, so making sure the aesthetics match. And to fund your upgrade, you can also sell your hardware on Jawa. Now, you can take the maximum convenience option, click the Get an Instant Offer button, and sell your GPU and CPU directly to Jawa. They give you an instant offer, takes all the hassle out of it. Or you can set your own prices, create your own listings, become a Jawa seller. It can even become a side business, again, making pre-built systems, selling individual components. There's tons of great reviews here, and best of all, I can save you $10 off your first purchase using code OWEN10, and a huge thank you to Jawa for sponsoring today's video. Follow the link in the video description and or pinned comment. But back to these talks on the 5090 costing $5,000. So what does it actually say in the original source? It says, according to industry sources on the 30th. Now, we also need to be clear, they're not saying who these industry sources are. So I don't doubt that they do have contacts somewhere within the industry. Now, what that is board partners, etc. Hard to say, because again, they're not listing their specific sources. Of course, they probably can't. And they're saying they got this information as of December 30th, so this is recent information. They're saying that AMD will reportedly raise prices for some of its GPUs starting in January of next year. And I will say that that completely aligns with and corroborates previous leaked information about AMD planning to raise prices in January. They're also saying Nvidia will do so starting in February. Again, we've seen lots of information indicating that Nvidia will also be adjusting its GPUs to the RAM situation and that price hikes would be likely. They're saying the price increases are expected to take place first for some consumer GPUs, such as Nvidia's GeForce RTX 50 series and AMD's Radeon RX 9000 series. Nvidia's flagship product, the RTX 5090, was released at the beginning of this year at $1,999, but it is expected to soar to $5,000 next year. Now, again, this is where I think it's important to read into this, because they're not giving us a direct quote from their industry sources. So this is all kind of just bundled up in a big paragraph statement about prices going up. So again, it's unclear exactly what they mean by it is expected to soar to $5,000. We could just be saying that, some people are predicting it to go to $5,000. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong. This very much to me does not read like some insider at Nvidia specifically leaked a planned price hike to a $5,000 MSRP in 2026. Like, that's not what this reads like to me. To me, this sounds like just further confirmation that we should expect GPU prices to be increasing in January and February. And then my personal comment on that is, and then probably multiple times throughout the year, because what's going on here, and this all makes sense, is that RAM prices are going up. And so the GPUs that we're buying now were produced when RAM cost less. But these contracts for RAM are negotiated for a certain amount of time. And once they expire, they need to get renegotiated. And RAM prices now are higher than they were, the last time that was done. So AMD and Nvidia will not take a hit to their profit margins if they can at all avoid it. So they're going to charge more to the add-in board partners like, we're talking ASUS, MSI, Gigabyte, PowerColor, Sapphire, etc. All of them that actually put the GPU and RAM onto a PCB and stick a cooler on it and then sell it to the store, who then sells it to the consumer. And all of those places have their profit margins. And if something goes up at the beginning of that chain, AMD and Nvidia, again, they're going to want to maintain their profit margin. So then they pass that on to the board partners who have a very slim profit margin. They don't really have a lot they can work with. So they will have to increase prices that are then sold to the stores. And stores want to make a certain profit margin on their sale to the consumer. So there's the initial price of RAM that increases. But since profit margins, businesses like to work in percentages, it's not like if RAM prices go up $100, that the GPU for the consumer goes up $100. It would go up a lot more than $100 because everybody's sticking their percentage increase off of the price they got it for the profit margin they're looking for. That's kind of the way that you would calculate this. But that being said, a 5090 has 32 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, that is a lot of VRAM for a GPU, but it's not an amount that would cost $3,000 more, even once you stick on all of those percentage increases, than what we were seeing last year. That doesn't make sense if we're just chalking it up to RAM price situations. Now, it's possible that maybe whoever's making this prediction is also just looking at the fact that the 5090 already costs more than $2,000, a lot of models between the $2,500 to $3,000 mark, and some well above that already. So I think it's possible that individual models might end up this expensive. But really, when it comes down to the actual bill of materials increase and then sticking all those percentage increases on it, I think a more reasonable expectation of how that will play out would be something like, maybe 16 gigabyte GPUs could go up $100 to the end consumer. That might be something that's realistic to expect. Again, it could be plus or minus on that quite a bit, but I think that would be kind of what I might expect several months from now. And then GPUs with 32 gigabytes of VRAM, okay, maybe that'll go up a few $100, but I wouldn't expect it to go up a few $1,000s just based off of the VRAM apocalypse. So that's where I'd kind of put some caution on this. But I do absolutely think that we will see GPU prices creeping up starting in January and February, and then they'll slowly see how far they can boil the frog by increasing it throughout the year. And I don't just mean the GPU makers or AMD or Nvidia, I mean also the RAM prices. We've seen a lot of signs that the RAM manufacturers will slowly increase pricing throughout 2026 every time they renegotiate contracts. So I would expect to see how they're all going to see how far they can push this. So now the problem is if, I oftentimes see people talk about, okay, so as PC gamers, we need to just boycott these products. And it's like, that might do something, but in the end, all of these companies, the reason this is happening is that there's an insatiable demand from data centers. So if gamers aren't buying, they can just shift their production resources to data center products, and there you go. Like, too bad. Sorry. So I don't know if there's a whole heck of a lot we can do about it, to be honest. It's just kind of, we'll have to see what's happening. Now, ASUS is officially announcing price hikes starting from January 5th, right before CES of 2026. This is another sign that prices are going up on computer components. We've also seen insider leaked information from like Dell and Lenovo talking about price increases. This ASUS announcement is official, but it's not listing any specific products or specific dollar amounts, but it is absolutely calling out the increase for DRAM and storage. So any product with DRAM and storage, so any computer product, could very well be seeing price increases officially from ASUS. We're also seeing some insider information about RAM prices potentially causing a delay of the next generation of consoles. Now, this is clearly nothing officially happening at this point. When you read into the leaks, and again, all my sources will be in the video description, what they're really saying is that there are now serious talks at the highest levels within the console manufacturing companies discussing this. So they're at least, it's on their radar. They're talking about whether these need to slip from the originally intended 2027, 2028 release window to further out. And so really, I think that comes down to, do the RAM prices stay crazy through that point, or are they starting to come down? And there's a lot of lead time on when do you start ramping up production on the consoles and negotiate the contract pricing for the parts. And, you know, a console's success could heavily depend on the price it releases at. So I would absolutely be cautious releasing a console at too high of a price. And I think that they very well could be a lot better off delaying the release rather than releasing at too high of a price. Because, you know, quite frankly, I expect the cross-gen period to be incredibly extended in the next generation of consoles, just because games are so expensive and so time-consuming to produce that to recoup that cost, it's gonna have to sell on a lot of copies. And so if you launch this next generation of console, I think it's going to be a long time before we see some major changes on that. Now, with the RAM increasing in price, a lot of PC builders are wondering, should I still get 32 gigabytes or should I get by with less when building a system? Now, for a long time, the conventional wisdom has been get 32 gigabytes of system RAM unless you're on an ultra budget system, because it's just not that more expensive to get 32, and 16's kind of borderline. But with RAM prices how high they are, a lot of people have been wondering, okay, but how bad is it to actually have 16 gigabytes of RAM instead of 32? And Hardware Unboxed recently released an amazing video testing this out. I absolutely love the methodology on this. And again, source in the video description. Please take a look at this video if you're at all interested in this, because they did a couple of things that I think answers some of the big questions people might have that a different methodology might not have addressed. What I mean is, number one, they did not do this on a clean system just running the game. He said he used it on, if I remember correctly, his gaming PC, which has, I think, like a 3-year-old Windows install and whatever the normal programs are going, and Windows bloat that acquires over that time, along with running a browser with, I think he said, 6 tabs open and running Discord in the background. So a lot more like how a gamer might actually use their PC rather than just isolating the game for benchmarking purposes. Since the point is, what's it actually like to use a PC with this much RAM for gaming? So I really like that piece of the methodology. Another piece I really liked here was looking at not just isolating the RAM situation, but also how VRAM factors into this. Because if you're somebody with an 8 gigabyte GPU, oftentimes the game will need to access system memory more so than you would on a GPU with more VRAM, because when what the game wants to fit into VRAM doesn't fit, you're going to have to access system memory more frequently. So there's actually differences in performance on your system RAM capacity depending on how much VRAM you have. And that was tested for here as well. And a few spoilers on the video, but I do highly recommend you watch it. Yes, the 8 gigabyte cards do have more issues than 16 gigabyte GPUs when limited to 16 gigabytes of system RAM instead of the 32. Also, in general, if you have enough VRAM, 16 gigabytes of system RAM was pretty much okay in almost all of the games tested, but not all of them. Now, keep in mind, this was with the browser tabs open and the and Discord running. So I think if you're doing the 16 gigabyte system RAM build, the one thing I would have liked tested here, which I understand there was already so much tested, is in that one situation where that happened, what if you closed the browser tabs and Discord? Would that game then be okay? Because I'm wondering so if I'm the kind of gamer, because literally I am this, when I'm gaming on my PC, I have everything else closed. I don't want any distractions. I want to be completely focused on the game. I'm not running anything else in the background at all. So it would have been nice to also see that, but I understand why you wouldn't also test for all of that. This was great. So anyway, check out this if you're interested in those benchmarks. Now, another thing to be focused on here is, what about production capacity, fabs? There's a bunch of stuff going on in the news with all of this. And we're seeing that potentially moving to the next generation of fabs happening a little bit sooner than originally expected. TSMC has reportedly decided to expedite construction of its 1.4 nanometer fabrication plant due to better than expected yields, with risk production commencing in 2027. And also TSMC's 3 nanometer fab in the US is apparently trying to be scheduled out a year ahead of original plans, reportedly to prevent rivals from gaining ground. Now, what rivals might they be talking about? Or we're also seeing headlines that Samsung's new plans for its US chip facility could put the Korean giant on par with TSMC, as they're dropping 4 nanometer and going on straight to 2 nanometer GAA. So that's certainly interesting. And we're also seeing SK Hynix, who planning to make a surprise move into U.S. advanced packaging, aiming to capitalize on the region's urgent need for it. Now, this is interesting because if you do keep an eye on all of this huge demand for AI data center, GPUs, et cetera, all of that there's multiple places that all of this can bottleneck. There's the actual just like chip production, but then there's also packaging requirements. And the packaging requirement is one of the bottlenecks in this whole supply situation. But then there's also the RAM and everything like that. So there's multiple places you can see, bottlenecks in this whole data center build out, but advanced packaging is one of them. SK Hynix looking to try to help solve that problem. Now, moving on to other topics, in my recent news video, I talked about yet another 5090 burning up another 12-volt high-power connection. Now, in that video, I mentioned, though, that while the 5090 is most often reported on this, there does just seem to be something not quite right with this connector. Because, yeah, I understand the 5090s trying to draw 600 watts, which is technically within spec of that connector, but you could see why drawing 600 watts through that small of a connector, you can start to see why we're having issues. But there is a Sapphire Nitro Plus 9070 XT, which is certainly not a 600 watt GPU, that does use this power connector and has been having some reports of failures. Now, to be clear, I can only remember about 5 of these being reported. And so, it's certainly not a lot. And even with the 5090s, when you think about how many 5090s are out there and then how many reports of melted connectors we see. Now, of course, there's probably some melted connectors that we don't see reported, et cetera. Oh, excuse me. Anyway, but we do have there's a question of how many, what percentage of these are actually having problems. But it's clearly not zero, and it's clearly not just 5090s that are having some issues with this connector. So I honestly hope that there's some other revision to this in our next generation of GPUs, because I just don't have a lot of confidence in this connector. Now, I've never had any problems with it on any of my GPUs. I think most people don't, but there's clearly something wrong here. Now, another thing there's clearly something wrong with is the 9800 X3Ds that a particular internet cafe owner has purchased, because he's reported 15 of them dead out of 150 that he purchased, but he purchased them back in March. Let's take a look at this. He says, I purchased 150 Ryzen 9 9800X3D CPUs in March of this year. I'm using them in an internet cafe, and I've never had such terrible experience. One CPU fails every 1 or 2 weeks. I don't know whether to blame the ASUS motherboard or AMD. The motherboard is a B650M AYW Wi-Fi. And then he talks about the power supply being an 850 watt gold rated unit. Although when people got some additional information, it was a HuntKey 850 watt PSU, which is certainly not some major name brand. So what's interesting here is this is a 10% fail rate just since March. So that's less than a year, which is obviously concerning. But we haven't seen widespread reports of 9800X3Ds failing. The biggest story I remember seeing is also specific to ASRock motherboards, but this owner is specifically stating that he's using an ASUS motherboard. So this kind of begs the question, why is this happening? Because I think we would be seeing a lot more reports of dead 9800X3Ds if a 10% failure rate was anywhere near what the global experience was. So now you have to wonder, is there something about his particular setup that's causing this? Again, there is that kind of low-end power supply that is a potential problem point. Is this specific motherboard having issues? Is this an issue with a particular batch of product, whether it's these 9800X3Ds or these motherboards or these power supplies? Maybe this internet cafe buying in bulk got a particular production run of some particular thing. Is there something else that's wrong with his building that he's in power-wise? It's kind of weird, but I thought I'd just kind of report it and see. I don't know, maybe you guys have some ideas what's going on there, but yeah, I wonder. Maybe it's something that particular motherboard that we just haven't seen reported widespread now. But yeah, I mean, that's certainly unusual. Now, speaking of 9800X3Ds, we are also expecting a 9850X3D coming soon based on a bunch of leaks, including a post on an AMD France, I think, website, so specifically from AMD themselves. Now, when we get this, if it actually does launch, et cetera, we don't know. But there's a lot of speculation on what the pricing is going to be. Seeing headlines now suggesting it could be a similar MSRP to the 9800X3D. There's questions on would it be priced above the original 9800X3D, or will it be priced at the 9800X3D MSRP, and then the 9800X3D has a price cut. There's a lot of ways this could go. But this headline, I'm not going to read too much into it because it looks to be just a price listing at a particular retailer with the MSRP listed as unknown at this point. So honestly, usually when we see prices listed before launch at just random stores online, they're placeholder pricing, so I don't want to read too much into this. Now, the 9850X3D in general isn't particularly interesting to me because as far as we can tell from the leaks, it's just a few hundred megahertz higher clocked version of the 9800X3D with no other advantages. So I would expect single-digit performance improvements, so nothing too crazy or interesting in my opinion. Now, one thing I do find very interesting is Steam's Best of 2025 list that they've published, because this gives us an idea of the best-selling new releases, best-selling top sellers for the year that aren't necessarily new releases, the most played games on Steam, most played games on Steam Deck, controller, VR, demos, etc. Now, it is important to always note that when we're looking at Steam statistics, it gives us a really interesting look at a huge data set for PC gamers. But remember, it's not the only data set for PC gaming. So, for example, games like, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 being in the gold tier here rather than the platinum tier here. What does that mean? Well, one thing is that it was available to play on Game Pass. So, it's very possible a lot of people played the Game Pass version, which wouldn't show up in Steam statistics. That's one thing to keep an eye on. And there's big games that aren't even available on Steam, like Fortnite or League of Legends. So, just keep in mind that this is not all of PC gaming, this is just Steam. But that being said, it's certainly interesting. So let's look at the top sellers for new releases and then compare them to the top sellers overall. Also, it's important to note how they're measuring a top seller. It's not the number of copies sold. So this is not a player count metric. This is by revenue. So a free-to-play game that sells tons of revenue in microtransactions could very well be up here. Again, so keep in mind what this is. It's by revenue. Now, the new releases is filtering out anything that did not release in 2025. And the list was generated on December 15th, so it goes through December 15th. Also note that this is not saying that Civilization 7 is number one. This is saying that it's in the top 12. So another interesting thing to how Steam presents this data is that they do it in tiers, where we have the 1st through 12th, but they're sorted randomly. So one of these is the number one, but we don't know which one. Could be Dune Awakening, could be Civ 7, could be Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. It very well might be Monster Hunter Wilds. We know that sold huge numbers of copies. But we have, Battlefield 6. Who knows how much it made on microtransactions, etc. So this is just the top 12 in no particular order. Now, one thing I like to see here is that there's some smaller games in the list, or not necessarily smaller game, but smaller studios up here with the big AAA titles. So we're seeing stuff like Schedule 1, Hollow Knight Silksong. I love that I see Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 in the top 12 here, along with some big heavy hitters here. So this is the top 12 by new released revenue. The 13th through 24th, again, in no particular order, we have here. Again, there's some games you would expect, and then there's some that it's good to see smaller scale stuff getting in here. We've got the silver tier. Again, I'm not going to read through everything, but you can just kind of skim through the list a bit. But then let's skip over to the top sellers for the year in general when not separated for having to have released in 2025. So this is making the most money in 2025, but didn't have to release in any particular year. The top 12 we see here includes now probably expectedly, big live service titles: Dota 2, Counter-Strike 2, Apex Legends, PUBG Battlegrounds. I'm still annoyed that they renamed it PUBG Battlegrounds, so it's Battlegrounds, but that's old news. Anyway, but again, we are seeing some titles up here like Repo, Schedule 1, etc. that might not have been something you thought would be in the top 12 for top selling revenue for the entire year, especially when not requiring it to have released this year. Our gold tier, 13th through 24th, you could take a look here, see if anything pops out at you. You definitely see some older games that are just still piling up the dollars. And anyway, so interesting stuff to take a look at. Here's our silver tier, etc. But another really interesting stat isn't just what's making the most money, but what is being played by the highest number of people, which is different than concurrent player count. So I know a lot of people like to look at concurrent player counts on Steam database to get an interesting idea of what games are popular, what are a lot of people playing. But one thing I don't like about that is concurrent player counts, I think, heavily favor live service titles and online multiplayer stuff that people just continue to come back to. Whereas there might be a lot of people who played a single player or, like a game that ends, right? And then it's over. They're done, and then they don't come back to it. So it's not necessarily going to maintain a higher concurrent player count. So what this is measuring is most played games measured by unique players over the calendar year. So the number of unique players it had throughout the entire year, which is a completely different metric than top concurrent player counts or current concurrent player counts, which is people playing it all at the same time on any given moment. That being said, it's still largely online multiplayer titles, which I think does still totally make sense. Now, some of them I think are interesting. Like, I was not necessarily expecting Left 4 Dead 2. Again, this is not necessarily saying it's number one. This is still in no particular order. But Left 4 Dead 2 came out in 2009. I didn't realize that was going to still be in the top 12 for most unique players in the year 2025. But again, some of these just make absolute normal sense. Stardew Valley is still just absolutely huge, selling crazy numbers. Terraria. But yeah, we're seeing games like Repo up here, as well as some big titles. We're seeing Peak up here. But yeah, of course, you got your Counter-Strikes and Apex Legends and Marvel Rivals and Dota and all of that. Our gold tier, so 13th through 24th, again, sorted randomly. We're still seeing a bunch of people playing, Baldur's Gate 3, It Takes Two, Cyberpunk, etc. So there you go. Silver tier, we can kind of scroll through here a bit. Don't necessarily need to read them all out, but maybe something will jump out at you. And again, sources are in the video description. Now, we're talking a bunch about Steam, but what if we talk instead about GOG? So Good Old Games is a interesting... I wouldn't really call it an alternative to Steam because they're just not on the same level of the number of games supported, but a lot of people really like GOG, DRM-free games, and a focus on old games. And one thing I really like is their focus on preserving old games that are starting to have some compatibility issues and actually fixing some of the compatibility issues when they offer these older games and DRM free. So there's a lot of goodwill here. Now, GOG has been partially owned by CD Projekt Red, the publishers, developers that make, Witcher and Cyberpunk games. However, there was huge announcement on December 29th, although when you read into what they're saying, it sounds like it'll, for the most part, from the end user perspective, probably just be business as usual. GOG is getting acquired by its original co-founder. And when you read through this post, what I would essentially summarize it as is it kind of looks like the CD Projekt Red doesn't really want to own the game service, the store GOG anymore. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to stop publishing their games DRM free on GOG, so that's good. But it does mean that the ownership here is changing. So basically, I might mispronounce his name, but Michael Kaczynski, he's been involved with CD Projekt anyway, but he's been a partial owner, and now I think he's taking on the full ownership. Again, you could read through this and see if you take away something different than me. I mean, when they're asking, like, why is this happening? Because he wants to preserve and grow the original philosophy behind GOG in a PC market that keeps moving toward mandatory clients and closed ecosystems. He believes GOG's approach is more relevant than ever. No lock-in, no forced platforms, sense of ownership. His goal is to keep supporting both gamers and developers and strengthen GOG's mission, preserve the classics of the past, celebrate standout games of today, and help shape classics of tomorrow. Why is CD Projekt doing this? Selling GOG fits CD Projekt's long-term strategy. CD Projekt wants to focus its full attention on creating top-quality RPGs and providing our fans with other forms of entertainment based on our brands. This deal lets CD Projekt keep that focus while GOG gets stronger backing to pursue its own missions. So basically, they're still saying they're focused on DRM free. The mission of GOG is staying the same. It just sounds more like the game company CD Projekt Red just doesn't need to be, running the show at GOG anymore. But they're still, working closely together and planning to kind of continue essentially the same mission, business as usual. Now, I do have some other stories I wanted to mention briefly. One is that Bloodborne PC online play is no longer just a dream, with Shad PS4 developer showcasing a working multiplayer milestone. So if you've kept your eye on Bloodborne on PC, it just feels like Sony and FromSoft could just print money if they made an actual Bloodborne PC version. But the PS4 emulator has made a lot of progress on it, and now they actually have multiplayer somewhat working. Now, Bloodborne is still very much a work in progress still, so is the emulator, but a lot of progress really has been being made here, so that's cool. And another quick story I just mostly want to bring up because I really like Mistborn and most Brandon Sanderson fantasy novels. And I really think Mistborn would work really well as a video game. And we got some information from the author, Brandon Sanderson, talking about that situation. Also, Brandon Sanderson is actually a gamer. I've watched some footage of him playing some Elden Ring. He does actually play video games. And so he's previously regretted having his game licensing tied to his movie licensing deal, but that's now kind of getting to get reworked. And so he can look at licensing his games separately from the movies. And he has some AAA game studios that he likes that are actually interested in this. Now, obviously, even if this ends up happening, game development timelines being what they are, this will be way in the future. But I do want to mention not just that I think the Mistborn plot is good and would work well in like an RPG format, but Brandon Sanderson's magic systems, especially the one in Mistborn, feels very video gamey. Like there's clearly defined rules for how everything works, and it would function extremely well, I think, as a video game magic system. So I think this would be cool, but just kind of bring it up because I'm a Brandon Sanderson fan, and I hope that this comes to pass. So I'm just spreading the news. And then the other one I was going to talk a little more about, but I'm looking at the length of this video and thinking maybe we just need to close it out here pretty quick, is a retired. So Sean Layden is retired from his position as the chairman of Sony Interactive Entertainment Worldwide Studios, retired back in 2019. However, in a recent interview, he talked a bit about the future of video game consoles and trying to expand the market. And there's an interesting quote here at the end where he's basically talking about the total number of consoles in any particular generation isn't really increasing. It's really been about 250 million, and that's with all of the different consoles, and there's exclusivity issues and all of that. And he mentions here at the end of this saying, I think we need to get in a world where we have a gaming format, and maybe it just comes from PC. Maybe we find a way to just do it all, in a Linux kernel or something, and then we have a consortium around that. We have licensing programs which allow other manufacturers to build into that space, and then you can talk about real numbers moving. That's how you get to the ubiquity of the toaster. But right now, I think we're kind of trapped in this containment field. Now, this is interesting to me because I really do kind of wonder about things needing to move in this direction in general, because with the cost of game development going up and up and up, but the like you said, the number of consoles within a generation is not necessarily going up and up and up. How do you fund the game development? Well, you need to be on a bunch of platforms. I mean, that's clearly what it seems like Microsoft is looking at with Xbox. There's a lot of rumors that the next Xbox might essentially just be a PC, and they're trying to publish their games on PlayStation now as well. And even PlayStation has been letting some of their exclusive titles end up on PC, at least eventually. So you do kind of wonder if the traditional separated out ecosystems really make sense anymore. And as you move into the future, I mean, if consoles are essentially just AMD PCs running a different operating system, you kind of wonder if the future is just going to be PC and that we'll just get more console-like PCs. I'm interested to see what Xbox comes out with. I'm interested to see how the Steam machine is received. So anyway, that's probably as much as I'm going to talk about that for today's video. For time reasons, don't forget to check out jawa.gg to get exactly what you are looking for. Remember, you can get code $10 off your first purchase using code ON10 and follow the link in the video description and or pinned comment. And I hope all of you have an excellent day.